Hey, what is up, guys? It is Johnny with Rules for Rebels, back with episode 46 of Side Hustle Tuesdays. Now, today's story involves a side hustle that's pretty easy to get started. It requires minimal startup capital and is something almost anybody could start in their home kitchen. This is a great business as it's something, again, that somebody can get started quickly with little capital and also little risk. And while that's a plus, at the same time, it can be a challenge because without a barrier to entry, anybody else can also start this business easily. So it brings a lot of competition. However, with the right marketing and a bit of hustle, you too could turn something like today's side hustle into a business just like Melissa did in today's side hustle story that you're about to hear about. So today's story is about a dog owner from Michigan who used her baking hobby to launch a gourmet dog biscuit hustle. Now, one question I get a lot in YouTube comments and emails about starting a business is people asking if they need to form an LLC, if they need to incorporate, etc. So this question pops up for every business from Amazon merch to Amazon FBA to private labeling to starting your own Shopify store. And so I kind of wanted to use today's side hustle story to touch on this a bit. So first off, I'm no lawyer, I'm no accountant, so don't take this as legal advice. But most businesses that we talk about in these side hustle stories, most businesses that we've covered in previous weeks, and most businesses and side hustle ideas I talk about this channel don't require you to form any type of business. Whether we're talking about eBay, Amazon FBA, or even opening up a Shopify store or starting a private label, most businesses you can start yourself as a sole proprietor, meaning you don't have an EIN or TIN number, you're not forming an LLC or incorporating, you're simply using a social security number, and I guess you could call this being a DBA. So, you're Jim Smith doing business as Bark and Dog Biscuits. There can be benefits to setting up an LLC or an S Corp or forming an actual business. The advantages can be tax advantages, protection of your personal assets, etc. However, that said, my advice is typically start something as a sole prop and see if it's successful, see if it's something you're going to pursue. I personally find that for every 5 or 10 business ideas I have, I maybe wind up following through with 1 or 2 of them. So while forming an LLC is not incredibly complicated or super costly, it does cost money. And if I formed an LLC for every business that I didn't pursue, I'd be throwing a lot of money down the drain. In some states you can form an LLC for $50. In my state, it's $500. Illinois really kind of rakes you over the coals for everything. But totally up to you. But, my general advice is start something off small, see if it takes off, and then worry about forming a business. Another thing I wanted to touch on is specific business licenses or insurance which may be required. And one thing before we get into this, a lot of times businesses that require a special license or a certification or a bond, that acts as a barrier to entry. So that keeps competition away. One of the businesses I'm involved in right now is something that requires quite a bit of money and probably about a year of time to set up and get the licensing and bonding and everything else set up in place. And that keeps competition out of the game. So while it can be a challenge for you starting a business, it can also be a benefit that there's a barrier to entry. But again, most businesses we talked about in these side hustle stories are pretty straightforward. If you're going to be importing socks from Alibaba and selling them on Amazon, there's not much to that. That said, if you start dealing with products that are consumable, and by that I mean people either eat or ingest them, there's often licensing involved. And even with skincare and healthcare products which are used topically, there may be licensing. There's other products which may be more high risk, which may not require a license, but which it may be smart to get a product liability insurance for. And what I mean by that, if you're selling a skin cream for 999 people, it probably works fine. If you give one person a rash or cause one person some ill health effects, that could be a huge lawsuit. So you can get what's called product liability insurance, and it basically insures you for whatever your product category is. And in a minute, I'm going to tell you guys about this. But when I got started selling hoverboards, I looked into product liability insurance, not only because of the potential fires that were happening because of, improperly wired batteries and poor quality batteries, but also, heck, somebody's riding one of these and goes down a flight of stairs or busts their head open, somebody could try to sue you. So I looked into it. I think it was going to cost me a couple $100 for the year. Your first year is based off of sales estimates since you don't have any sales to base it off of. So you can kind of estimate on the low side to get a lower rate. And, after that, you'll actually have sales numbers that you can go off of. And the more sales you have, the more it's going to cost you. But definitely something to look into for more higher risk products. So again, like I just said, when I was selling hoverboards, I looked into getting one. It was a short-lived hustle, so I didn't wind up following through and buying the policy. but with the risk of fires while charging, as well as someone busting their head open riding it, it probably would have been smart to get insurance. Typically, like I said, the insurance policies are based on sales. So with a new business which has no sales, it's based on estimates. So you can estimate low and your first year's insurance will be cheap. Anyhow, like I said, I've gotten a bit off track here, so just wanted to touch on those couple things before we get started. I think for the majority of people when starting a business, you should be focused on your product and getting it in front of the right customers, much more so than you should be concerned about business formation and other things which you can sort out later. Because if a business doesn't take off, you have no need for any of that anyhow. So getting into today's story, finally, I know I've been rambling for a bit. Today's story is about Melissa Bruno from Michigan. Melissa was a high school counselor, but as a hobby, she liked to bake, and she found she especially loved baking for her dogs. Now, you've probably seen at pet store or a farmer's market or even these, mall kiosks or gourmet stores, they sell gourmet dog biscuits, that look like cookies or cupcakes. And that's the type of stuff that Melissa really enjoyed baking for her 3 dogs. She had a boxer, a French bulldog, and a Boston Terrier, and she's been making dog treats for years. Her family often jokes with her that she bakes for the pets more often than she bakes for them, but the dogs sure like the treats. The dogs really did like her treats, and Melissa began to wonder whether the treats were really that delicious or whether her dogs were just hungry or whether it was just her dogs that liked them. So she wanted to see if other dogs liked the treats as well. So she baked a batch, she brought them into work and gave them to some coworkers who were pet owners. The treats got rave reviews from their dogs as well as from her coworkers, and they started requesting more. Melissa soon realized she could make much more of this than just a hobby and decided to turn it into a business, which she called Bruno's Barkin' Dog Biscuits. Now, really quickly, I'd like to point out something about Melissa's website. I see a lot of people getting really hung up on websites and which platform to use, and while I can't say that that's not important, Melissa is running off SquareUp, which is a free e-commerce platform offered by Square, the credit card merchant service. So Square, if you use their credit card processing, they'll let you use their tool called SquareUp to create an e-commerce site. Now, Melissa's site, if you wanted to search it, it's a little bit slow to load, which is not only not really good for SEO, it can also be a deterrent for people from visiting the site. There's been some studies put out. I think if a site takes more than like 1.3 seconds to load, a pretty large percentage of people abandon the site. But I did notice Melissa's site is a little bit slow to load, which can be bad for SEO. The design of the site also leaves something to be desired as, again, it's a free platform. She's working with what I imagine is a limited number of SquareUp templates. But the point is that hasn't stopped her from making sales, so don't get hung up on the small stuff. The important thing is that she took action, she has a product, and she's getting it in front of the right audience, dog owners. So when Melissa got her first order through the site, like many of the entrepreneurs from these side hustle stories, at first she didn't believe it was real. She had to refresh the browser a couple times, she even logged out and logged back in, but sure enough, it was real. She had an order. At this point, she decided to fully commit. Melissa began attending craft shows and farmers markets. She marketed her dog biscuits as natural and preservative-free and healthy, and whenever possible, she tries to use organic and locally sourced ingredients. So her investment into this business was pretty small, only about $400. She spent the money on ingredients to make the dog biscuits, packaging and some other materials, labels, etc. She spent $50 to obtain an LLC, which we touched on a little bit earlier. In my state, that would be $500, but apparently in Michigan, it's a bit cheaper. She also had to get a state pet feed license, which is something the state of Michigan requires. Now, this type of thing can scare off some people starting a business, but Melissa said it was only $25 and it was nothing more than filling out a form. Basically, the state just wants to make sure people aren't selling toxic products that are going to be handled by people and consumed by pets. But again, this is why I touched on his business formation and licensing at the beginning of this episode. Were Melissa making baking goods that were going to be consumed by humans, it probably would have been a bit more challenging to set up, but still doable. She might have had to get a commercial kitchen. But for pets, well, there was a little bit of a hurdle in the road. Again, it was nothing more than $25 and filling out a form, and Melissa was in business. So as I mentioned, Melissa made her online store using SquareUp.com. Her only marketing was a Facebook fan page, so she didn't spend any money on marketing or advertising. She will eventually invest in her own website, but for now she's taking it slow. But even with a SquareUp website, she's making $500 to $600 per month in profit and is reinvesting most of that profit into adding new recipes and enhancing the packaging and stashing some of it away for when she eventually does do a redesign on her website. Her goal is to get it on the shelves of specialty stores and pet stores and to get away from farmers markets and craft shows As well, she does enjoy it. She doesn't like her whole weekend being spent behind a booth. So that brings up another important point. Most of us, I think, prefer e-commerce over to face-to-face sales. It's more passive. Orders can come in while we sleep. We don't have to interact with every customer, etc. I get it. I'm the same way. Sometimes, however, getting out there and shaking hands and talking to your customers about your product is a great way to create a loyal customer base and to build up your brand, and it's a great way to get started. And I think it's important to point out that sometimes we have to do things early on to get things off the ground that aren't what we want to be doing in the long run or that require more work, but it's important to do these things, and I think Melissa is going to be successful because she realizes that. Melissa is in negotiations with some pet store buyers, so hopefully she gets her product in some stores soon. But before we end this episode, let's talk briefly about licensing and registering your business. While it can seem overwhelming, doing a quick Google search for your state and the term business license should pull up some resources that will tell you all you need to know about getting a business license in your state, and if one is even necessary to begin with. Now, Bruno's Barkin Biscuits only is an LLC, and it cost her $50. Different states have different filing fees. So again, whereas in my state it's a $500 fee, in Michigan it's $50, in a state like Nevada it's $75. The government sites are pretty easy to navigate and the forms are pretty easy to fill out. But if you want it simplified even more for a relatively small fee, you can use a service like LegalZoom to not only send you the paperwork, but also help you fill out that paperwork and getting everything filed and set up for you. And a lot of times they'll also even throw in some other benefits like some commonly used forms you may need. I know last time I set up a business through LegalZoom, they also included a free year of accounting services through some companies. So there are some other little perks you get as well. Now again, Melissa's business, while simple to set up, was even a bit more complicated than most businesses you guys will probably start, as again, her product is something that is ingested by pets. But for any non-food business, you most likely don't have to worry about any licensing or registration beyond a basic business license, which may or may not even be necessary. My point is, it's more important to think about other things like how to reach more dogs or how to get from selling in person to selling online. A few months back, we did an episode about a dog Airbnb type business started by a woman using a site called rover.com, which basically allows people to host animals for a few days while their owner is on vacation or, busy at work, whatever else. And the woman who started that business is making over $200 per day. I would maybe thinking about trying to if I were doing a dog biscuit business, I would think about maybe trying to advertise my business on a site that targeted that audience, like rover.com. I may also try to connect with local Rover dog hosts and see if maybe they wanted to use my biscuits in some type of goodie bag or something like that to sell to their customers. Maybe it could be some little upcharge you sell. Do you want your dog to have an afternoon treat? We sell Barkin dog biscuits and, make a little bit of money selling those. You get the point. Basically, I'd be trying to find strategic partners where we could benefit each other's businesses by connecting. Focus on making something people want and connecting those people, and quit wasting time and energy thinking about things that aren't a big deal or aren't important, like should I do an LLC or an S-Corp? Just get the business started and worry about that stuff later. Anyhow, guys, that is today's episode of Side Hustle Tuesdays. I hope you enjoyed it. Hope you were inspired. Now get out there and start your own side hustle.